Turkiye is considered at the crossroads between West and East, and now between Ukraine and Russia. We'll take a look at how the country is helping forge peace by talking to both sides. Hello, I'm Nathan King, sitting in for Anna Naidu, and of course, this is The Heat. Turkiye's foreign policy is complicated. On the one hand, it's a NATO member, but on the other, it has close ties to Russia. Ankara is now in the middle of an even more challenging conflict as it finds itself between Russia and Ukraine and their ongoing conflict. CGTN's Michal Bardavid has more on this political triangle.
While many countries find themselves on one side or the other in the Ukraine-Russia conflict, Turkey has tried to put itself into a unique neutral position. Turkey has managed to maintain positive ties with both Moscow and Kiev. It has emerged as one of the only countries with the potential to take on the role of the mediator. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has visited both Russia and Ukraine since the conflict began. Though Turkish officials have stressed that Turkey supports Ukraine's territorial integrity, it is the only NATO country that hasn't imposed any sanctions on Moscow. At the same time, a Turkish company has been selling armed drones to Ukraine, which have proven effective on the battlefield against Russia.
For Russia, I mean, it stands to have quite a lot to gain from maintaining that relationship with Turkey, as long as Erdogan doesn't go too far the other way. I think if we saw Turkey increasing its arms supplies to Ukraine, certainly I think if Turkey was to allow any NATO warships into the Black Sea, those would be two things which for Putin would cross the line.
But Ankara cannot afford to cut ties with Moscow. In 2021, Russia supplied almost half of Turkey's natural gas needs. Russia is in the process of constructing the Akkuyu nuclear power plant in Turkey, and Russians are a major source of income for Turkey's tourism industry. 5 Turkish banks have also adopted the Russian payment system MIR, critical at a time when Russian banks have been banned from the Western payment system SWIFT. Trade with Russia has been booming this year, and Ankara has stressed that oligarchs are welcome in the country. Ankara has also taken steps in support of Kiev. During a visit to Ukraine last week, President Erdogan announced an infrastructure deal was signed that will allow Turkish companies to reconstruct damaged areas in Ukraine when the fighting ends. Ankara's current stance benefited both sides when Turkey, together with the UN, brokered the grain deal with Russia and Ukraine, which allowed the resumption of Ukrainian grain and Russian food and fertilizer exports. If Turkey manages to continue walking this fine line, when and if peace talks do happen between Russia and Ukraine, many analysts say Ankara may very well be in diplomatic position to play host. Michal, Bardavid, CGTN, Antalya.
And so to discuss Turkey's foreign policy, let's bring in our guests from Ankara. We have Yusuf Alabarda. He is an international security and politics expert from Istanbul. We have Eugene Chausovsky. He is a geopolitical analyst. Hakan Camuz is a head of international law at the British law firm Stoke White. He joins us from London. And here in Washington, D.C., and long-time friend of the show, Anton Fedyashin. He's a history professor at American University. Welcome all, I really appreciate it. Yusuf, let's start with you. Michal put it very well in terms of the sort of central role that the Turkish president is playing. We saw some video there in Sochi and then with the UN Secretary General, as well as meeting with Vladimir Putin. What sort of role, let's get deeper into it, is he trying to play, and where does it fit into Turkey's national interest?
Okay, first of all, we should understand that Turkey is clearly objecting to the invasion of the Ukraine and acting together with all other countries inside the United Nations, which is condemning the violation of the sovereign rights of the Ukraine. Until from 2014, Turkey is strictly against the annexation of Crimea. Today, the Turkish president clearly again iterated his sayings that Russia should directly hand over the Crimea to the Ukraine. But the other fact that Turkey is also having good relations with the other parts of the world when compared to the Cold War period. So Turkey is building huge projects together with Russia and also building many different relations with the African countries, with different Central Asian countries, but especially with Russia, as you said. Turkey's interest is to keep its relation with Russia in terms of energy, in terms of gas and nuclear power plant, as you said. But at the same time, try to also be a collaborator between the two conflicting sides.
Hakan, I want to pick up with you. Just detail me the complexities of the relationship between Moscow and Ankara, because obviously there is close contact, even though Washington and Moscow don't have direct talks, or even Brussels most of the time. But then, of course, Turkiye is a member of NATO, and also there are very differing interests, as we saw from Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Moscow's comments, of Russia's comments recently, about worries about a potential Turkish-backed front in northern Syria again. So how does Ankara and Moscow manage this?
So in the words of Winston Churchill, he said in international affairs, there's no permanent friends or permanent enemies. There's permanent interests. And so when there are interests aligned, they are obviously talking to each other. This is the nature of international relations, and this is how states act. When it comes to these kind of issues, Indian Foreign Minister, I think it was, who said, in the affairs of statecraft, the morality takes a back seat. I don't think we need to talk about conflicting interests or conflicting moral values here in the conduct of state affairs. Right now, Venezuela is under sanctions, as you know, in the U.S. sanctions, but it's the U.S. oil companies that are actually selling Venezuelan oil to the world market.
Right.
So there's no point of analyzing the behavior of a state in given circumstances. There's a war ongoing between the two states who are neighbors of Turkey. When it comes to your question about Russia's relationship with Turkey, whilst on the war front in Ukraine, they are obviously talking to Russia in a very friendly way. At the same time, there's a massive conflict of interest in northern Syria, because Turkish interests directly in conflict with Russian interests, and who was backing the Assad regime in Syria. And so recently there was a meeting in Tehran, you remember, only a couple of weeks ago. They were in Tehran, where Iran and Syria on one side of the conflict and Turkey is on the other side of the conflict, where the President Erdogan actually trying to maneuver his country's position, Turkey's position, especially his own political position too, with the millions of Syrian refugees who are still in Turkey. He's trying to find some kind of a solution, and he has to work with Russia. Not necessarily Iran is a secondary player there. It's Russia he has to work with. So whilst on one hand he's very friendly and really keeping, as your commentators and your beginning of the program have said, he's playing very good. On the other hand, in Syria conflict especially, he is playing a completely different political maneuvering. And so this is what the statecraft is, and that's what he is doing. And I think so far successfully.
Well, that's the view from Ankara. Eugene, let me bring you in, because obviously Turkiye is playing a unique role, not imposing sanctions on Russia. Still, of course, the oil flows, helping broker that grain deal, which, let's face it, is the one silver lining that we've seen from the storm clouds over Ukraine. But how is NATO, fellow NATO members, and the European Union viewing Ankara's efforts here?
Well, I think the viewpoint from the fellow NATO members is one of complexity. On the one hand, obviously, all of the other NATO countries have passed sanctions against Russia for its invasion of Ukraine, and Turkey is the lone NATO member that did not do so. But on the other hand, that's actually what put Turkey in a position to mediate the agreement that we saw between Russia and Ukraine and the UN as well over the grain agreement. So in that sense, Turkey plays a very unique role in, yes, it will challenge the NATO position, not only over Russia, but also other areas, but it also serves a very important role and one that has actually produced benefits for Ukraine, Russia, and the world at large when it comes to unlocking those food supplies.
Yeah, Anton, I want to follow up with that. Is this a case where NATO members may hold their nose but actually need an Ankara right now? And also, it's sort of as a slight counterweight to the sort of very speedy decisions we've seen within NATO. For example, Sweden and Finland joining. Turkiye slowed down that, largely for domestic concerns over terrorism, but also left thinkers a little room to think about another 2,000-mile border directly with Russia, with NATO, 2,000 kilometers rather. So is it a necessary role that the Turkish president is playing here?
Well, the Turkish president has very intelligently used statecraft, which is the key term that Hakan used a little bit earlier, to position himself as a mediator, which, you know, if you read enough history, you realize that is always the most advantageous position in any war. Erdogan seems to have come to the conclusion that the whole world is standing at a point of contact with one system of international relations vanishing and another one emerging. And Erdogan is doing what the Ukrainians should have done in the beginning, from the early 2000s on, which is to place his country into the middle, a bridge nation, a decider, a balancer that can affect the ultimate outcome, or at least affect it seriously, between the West and the East. And Turkey, of course, geographically is perfectly positioned for this. Erdogan understands that there's a greater Eurasia integration project that has been going on very slowly, that has sped up after 2014, and even more so after the February invasion. And he understands perfectly well that Turkey is in a very good position to take advantage of both that integration project and the future of Europe. I think actually he's thinking less in terms of NATO than he is in terms of Eurasia. And I'm not really surprised that Erdogan has taken this attitude of strategic ambiguity. Sound familiar to anyone?
Yeah, Eugene, let me just follow up on that, because obviously Turkey putting itself in the middle here, or while being a NATO member, but it continues to buy, for example, Russian military systems like the S-400, but also wants American military. So, Eugene, I'm going to put it to you. Is there a danger here of Turkey sort of falling through the middle? And how much does it balance its interests in the international community, but also with its national interests?
Well, there certainly is a delicate balancing act that Turkey needs to play and is playing currently. And if it oversteps in one direction, that could lead to some pretty significant consequences. But I think Ankara is trying to be very careful about that. And as the other speakers have mentioned, it has interests with both sides, with both Russia in terms of weapons supplies, but also energy, which Turkey badly needs from Russia. That's one of the reasons that they didn't pass sanctions, but also because of its longstanding security relationship and economic relationship with the West. So in that sense, Turkey is playing that balancing role, but it's doing so, of course, for its own national interests. There are things to be gained and crises to be averted. But, you know, going again back to the grain deal, this doesn't necessarily have to come at the expense of any one party. I mean, that's what this grain deal has showed, is that Turkey can look after its own national interests, benefit Russia, benefit Ukraine, and benefit the world at large, especially, you know, some of the countries that were really suffering as a result of those blockades. So that's not to say that this is going to be perfect and without challenges, but that is the delicate balancing act that it's trying to play.
Well, Yusuf, one of the main challenges is domestic opinion from the US, which is, as you know, very, very much pro-Ukrainian, tens of billions of dollars in arms shipment. And a lot of domestic political opinion in the US sometimes looks at Turkey and says, well, are you a real ally or not? How does Ankara do that sort of balancing act, considering the continued might of the US when it comes to Europe and all things interventionist?
Yeah, there are lots of critics toward the Turkish policy inside the United States, especially at the media outlets, which we can every day witness such kind of critics. We know that. But when you take a look at the Turkey's position, I can say that Turkey fulfilled all its responsibilities under the NATO memberships. For that reason, we should understand, and we should also take a look at to the other countries as a NATO member, what they have done before the invasion of the Ukraine. Even they didn't supply simple defense equipments and refused to sell them to the Ukraine, while Turkey was providing complex weapon systems to the Ukraine.
Hakan, how much of a domestic aspect is this foreign policy towards Ukraine? Obviously, Turkey is not alone in suffering the consequences of the Russia-Ukraine war. I'm talking about, of course, inflation. What was it in Turkey recently? 80%. There is a re-election coming up. There is an alliance. Sorry?
70.
Okay. Well, you know, whatever the figures, you know, Turkey is obviously not alone in the world and feeling the effects. There's a re-election campaign coming up, domestic pressure. How does this all play in?
I mean, I can tell you from London, we feel a massive pressure of the inflation here.
Yes.
Unprecedented numbers in the British economy. Obviously, it's reflective in proportionality in the Turkish economy. Therefore, numbers are not necessarily really that important. It's a global phenomenon that we're all going through at the moment.
But it's particularly bad in Turkey. I mean, I just want to nail you down here. It's not 13%, is it?
No, of course not.
Yeah.
But at the same time, this is, you know, on its own is not the sole point of analysis that we need to really look into it. More importantly, think about this. There's an election coming up in about 10 months' time in Turkey, and you have a leader who right now going through a massive international upheaval around the country. And he's dealing with it in a kind of professional and a successful way. We all admit to this in this program. As you can see, everybody's talking about the success story of Erdogan and his policies in handling a massive country like Russia. And what is going on between Russia and Ukraine obviously has a lot of other elements, other players. Everyone has their own policies. I just want to touch upon the NATO issue that my friends were talking about earlier. When Turkey was actually calling for NATO members to help it at the height of the Syrian war, revoking Article 4 and maybe necessarily Article 5 in being under threat, NATO's members, including Obama administration at the time, didn't care, and they would not provide anything to Turkey.
Yes, I remember that.
Turkey is acting on that experience of how it was treated by the international community at the time. So if they actually can hold on to their own policies at the time, Turkey is holding on to its policies, as my colleague stated earlier. This is an independent approach to what is going on, and they're handling it quite well. Although I gotta say, this success story, that Erdogan would love to interpret it into his domestic issues of election that's going to come up. And I can tell you that it is actually working in the sense that people can see the positive conduct of Erdogan and his government on the issues of international affairs. But the economy is a serious problem, and I am sure he will deal with it as and when the economic measures that he will take in dealing with it, probably before election. And he has already given indication that he's prepared packages.
Hakan, I just want to do a quick follow-up. Is President Erdogan in trouble domestically with the electorate? And is this stance from him, and let's face it, a more forward-looking Turkish foreign policy in the last decade or so under him as Prime Minister and then President, does that create a buffer against domestic concerns?
Look, I've been on the Heat program so many times, and mostly every time before the election, I've been at this channel for quite a few times.
Well, sorry, you still got to answer.
I'm so used to basically challenging this question, and I'll tell you the same thing that I've said several times in several elections that took part before. We all know the economic problems that exist in Turkey right now. We can all see it, all right? Everyone talks about it. There is nothing else that we're talking about in domestic politics except the economy. If he fixes it, what else do we have to discuss? Tell me. The man's a successful politician.
All politics are local, and it's the economy stupid. Yes, we know
exactly.
that.
Exactly. I agree with you. And how about this? This is exactly what I'm saying. I'm challenging. I'm saying if he fixes it just before the election, then what else do we have to discuss of his election?
It's amazing. I'm not putting any shade on Ankara, but it's amazing how politicians find the tools necessary just before elections generally.
Especially in government, you have
Yes.
everything at your disposal.
Anton, I want to go to you. I mean, the Moscow view must be, well, this is kind of handy that to have Ankara as the go-between. I don't want to belittle Ankara's role here, but also wariness in terms of Ankara's ambitions. Let's face it, the Crimea, the Straits, the Mediterranean, all is something in Russia's national interest dating back to the 18th and 19th century.
Well, of course. Listen, the Russian Empire in all of its guises, from Muscovy on to the Soviet Union, fought the most wars in its 1,000-year history against the Ottoman Empire.
That's where I was going for. I knew you would pick it up.
Absolutely. No one else fought as many wars with the Russians as the Ottomans, the Turks did. And, you know, that's history. But look, over the past 20 years, the Russians have been weaving a very delicate and very complex, but so far quite impressive geopolitical tapestry throughout Eurasia, especially in the greater Middle East. And it really took a lot of Western and in part American blunders in this particular region to actually bring the Russians, the Iranians, and the Turks together, which is something, if you said, you know, about the 19th or 20th century, people would have thought that you were crazy. But look, this Eurasian integration, this desire to actually deal with your neighbors, even though you disagree with each other on many issues, this seems to be the trend of the current moment and of the foreseeable future.
Anton, I just want to follow up. I mean, this sounds like a Western mainstream media economist sort of headline, but is Ankara's ambitions essentially to re-establish more influence again in that region with echoes of the Ottoman Empire?
Well, listen, no, I don't think so, because the Ottoman Empire didn't just have influence. It was an empire with enormous swaths of lands
Absolutely,
attached to it.
but in terms of in Syria, for example, in terms of gas deals in North Africa,
yes.
you are seeing a tremendous amount of diplomacy from Turkey that you could say 15 years ago just wasn't present.
Yes, that's true. So in terms of influence, absolutely. But I can't name you, Nathan, a single great power, least of all the one in whose capital you and I are sitting, that does not want to spread its influence, not only within its own region, but also across the world. The difference is that the Turks seem to be willing to cooperate with their neighbors, even though they have many disagreements. The messianism doesn't seem to be there, at least not yet. Who knows what will happen in the future? But everyone seems to be playing the game very carefully in this broader region. So let's see what happens in the future.
Yusuf, I just want to follow up with Eugene. I'm going to go with Eugene first, because I want to follow up in terms of the realpolitik of this and the fact that Turkiye, for a long time, has seen the devastation of what happens in wars. I'm thinking about the 4 million Syrian refugees and the clashes with the European Union about migration. Was that a big lesson, and still an ongoing lesson, Syria, for how it is acting over Ukraine?
I think certainly that plays a factor. I mean, Turkey is in a very dynamic neighborhood, let's put it this way, touching a lot of different regions that have a lot of these different, whether it's active military conflicts or, you know, different events that do send troops across Turkey's borders and near Turkey's borders. So it makes sense to your previous question about whether it's trying to recreate the Ottoman Empire. I don't think so, but you know, the influence, if Turkey can play a more assertive and active role in trying to shape those, you know, dynamic borders, then I think it puts itself in a better position, not necessarily to be the strongest player in every case, but at least to shape the course of events and try to steer them in a more positive and a less conflictual or a less militaristic direction.
Yeah, Yusuf, can you put a cover on that? Because I think this sort of stability argument must be sort of driving a lot of decision-making in Ankara. After all, we talked about Syria, but we have the Armenia-Azerbaijan situation and other potential conflicts all around Turkey. And it must be disconcerting for Ankara to see, obviously, something flaring into its Black Sea area of influence too.
That's right. Turkey is trying to prevent also its own borders from the clashes.
Absolutely, and refugee inflows,
when you take a look at the Turkey's position on the northern side, the Ukraine invasion. On the Caucasian side, the invasion of the Armenians of the Azerbaijani lands and the conflict in this area. Syria is fighting with the civil war inside since 11 years, and which is affecting Turkey in a huge way. When you take a look at Iraq is also an unstable country who still has not a legitimate government yet. For that reason, when you take a look at the Turkey's position, Turkey should act accordingly and should be very careful. For that reason, he is trying to prevent its borders, especially from such kind of conflicts. And all its efforts in this region is trying to make it balanced. But for sure, he is also developing its hard power enormously in order to give a deterrence to all conflicting sides.
Hakan, I want to finish with you. And I'm just going to list where Turkey is sort of been mediating or in the middle. Obviously there's Iran and Israel, Ukraine, Russia, Saudi Arabia repairing relations as well. There has even been talk of nominating President Erdogan for the Peace Prize, as well as going on with not imposing sanctions like the majority of the world's population. This might be a softball for you, Hakan, but do you think that President Erdogan deserves that, considering this sort of role that he's been playing in this conflict and others?
I don't know whether if he's doing it to deserve any prize, but I know he's doing it because this is a necessary conduct of whoever is running Turkey. I mean, being a leader of a country like Turkey is difficult. It doesn't matter who you bring in. And he is right now trying to fix the relationship, yes, correct, with Saudi Arabia, trade relationship, trying to fix the relationship with Egypt. As you know, recently he actually made a comment, foreign minister made a comment. Only recently, a couple of days ago, he actually made a comment, along again with the foreign minister, about maybe repairing, somehow bringing a conclusion to a Syrian affair. And they are active in Libya, as you know. They are trying to fix the Palestinian-Israeli issue. Palestinian president is in Turkey today. And he actually declared that our relationship between Turkey and Palestine will always remain strong, whatever happens with Israel. And, he's quite active in dealing with this international affairs, because he has to. It is part of being a leader of Turkey. Turkey is a regional power. We need to literally come out and say this. And being a regional power, these are the kind of roles he has to adopt and do. Whoever comes to power in Turkey will have to from now on, because he did change the face of country.
It's really great to talk to you in London, and we've had all points in between Ankara, Istanbul, and here in Washington, D.C. And I don't think we've had an in-depth discussion on Turkey for a long time, and I think this is one of the only networks you're going to find it on. So I really appreciate us delving deep, because it's very important. Well, I just want to wrap that up by saying that is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Nathan King in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us. I hope to see you soon.
You've